I do.
Thank you. Presently, I guess I should ask.
My occupation is basically, I'm an electrical engineer. I worked for Texas Instruments for 20 years. And then I worked at SVI International most of that time as what's called an IPA, intergovernmental transfer, working first at the Security Agency and then at the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and then for the last 10 years as an independent contractor.
Let's talk for a moment then about your educational experience that began your career. If you would, tell me where you went to college, if you did, and any advanced degrees.
Where I was born and raised. It's nice to be back.
Go Knowles.
And my PhD in electrical engineering was at the University of Wisconsin. Actually, I did that research at Bell Laboratories, my dissertation research at Bell Laboratories in Murray Hill, New Jersey.
What was that dissertation in, sir?
Well, not surprisingly, in speaker recognition.
And can you just tell us the subject of that, or the thesis that was being worked on?
Well, an engineer. The title of I can't quite be sure of the title, but it's something like a practical method of speaker verification. And it dealt with what do I need to say? It dealt with making speaker recognition decisions based upon parameters extracted from the speech signal.
And that was back in 1970? And did you then continue through your professional career in endeavors wrapped around speaker recognition and voice recognition?
I went to work for Texas Instruments in Dallas, Texas, and worked on speech recognition and in speaker recognition. Much of that under contract with the Air Force. The speaker recognition work was funded by the Air Force primarily. The speech recognition work was internally funded by Texas Instruments.
And if you would just tell the court, back in the 70s when you started with TI, what was that corporation's interest in looking into voice recognition and or speaker recognition?
Beats me. I don't know why they did that. Okay. Crazy.
Yet it took a good part of your time at TI to look into those areas or issues, did it not?
Yes. I think well, you know, Texas Instruments is they're a bunch of cowboys down there, and the president, Mark Shepard, had an interest in this for reasons that only he understood.
Did some of those projects that include trying to use voice or speak recognition in everyday usage?
Yes. And much of this work was actually under the auspices of the Air Force. Say at this point, I'm not sure this is totally relevant, but it's important in terms of the technology. There are two kinds of applications. One you might call the speakers trying to gain access to a resource. And the other is where for example, in NSA, where people are trying to track someone who perhaps doesn't want to be found. So those are two opposite, diametrically opposed in terms of prior probabilities, in terms of application parameters. The one that I worked on, which you're asking about, at Texas Instruments, was the former, gaining access, and that was also funded by the Air Force, gaining access, where the prior probability of the true speaker is very high. And that.
Excuse me for 1 second. Dr. Doddington, we're getting a little bit of a feedback, and can we move your microphone, tip it up just a little bit?
Mind approaching help a little bit if we do this.
May I approach the witness as well?
Hey, why don't you come, just speak naturally to me for a moment?
Okay.
Okay, just tell me your name again.
You already know my name.
Okay, that's better. I'm not getting the puffing sound. Thank you.
Let us then spend a moment, if we might, on some of the projects that got you into this area of study back when you were at TI. You mentioned a moment ago to access to resources. In layman's term, is that such matters as
Entry control.
entry control, like speaking voice to get through a door?
That's correct. In fact, we actually installed an operational system in TI's central computer facility, and that operated for many years. I'd love to talk for hours about that.
Let's move on and go forward, however, and talk about other projects that you were on or worked on while at Texas Instruments. If you would, tell me other projects that sort of focused you again on the idea or the concept of speaker or voice recognition.
Well, I think relative to this particular hearing, what has obsessed me for most of my career is calibrating the performance of technology, evaluation, you might say. And I got involved in that in the area of what is the performance of speech recognition, speaker recognizers, and actually wrote a paper. Turns out it was a cover feature article in a 1981 IEEE Spectrum article. And the reason I became interested in evaluation, obsessed you might even say, is because this was the first generation of speech recognizers that were being fielded and that were being advertised. And the performance, and Texas Instruments also was involved in developing, under my supervision, was involved in developing speech recognition capability, if not products. And the performance that was being claimed for these systems that were being sold was, of course, favorable to the systems, and favorable by very large factors. And this bothered me, because when the systems are actually fielded, they provided far poorer performance. And if I could digress for a moment, let me just say what this is all attributable to, and it carries over into speaker recognition also. And that is that in the speaker recognition case, or in the let's say the user identification challenge, you try to measure, do biometric measurements, measure biological or physical attributes of the person to try to identify him. And I would like to say speech is different. Speech is not like fingerprints. Speech is not like iris scans. Speech is not like DNA. all these things are physical artifacts. Speech is an energy signal. It is a performance. It is like a dance. It is, while in a dance or in speech, there are underlying anatomical constraints. The vast majority of what you experience is learned performance. Now, there are, of course, idiosyncrasies unique to the individual in these performances, but they're subject to variation due to many factors.
I want to speak about those more in a moment when we talk about how you got to the level of expertise that might bring you here before the court today. I want to spend a few more minutes, though, on your experience level and your training that had gotten you to that point. So we were talking...
Going back to the paper that I wrote in 1981, I basically just did an evaluation of, I think it was 6 commercially available speech recognizers that the companies that were fielding them cooperated to do the evaluation, and I published the results in the IEEE Spectrum. The performance of the systems, as you might expect, was significantly poorer than they were advertising.
Okay. Tell me, in your work then at Texas Instruments, first of all, what level or what was your position at TI while you were there?
Well, I'd like to tell you what my final position was, which is Chief Speech Scientist and TI Senior Fellow. I was the 7th.
And tell the court, if you would, as a Chief Speech Specialist for TI, what were your duties?
I basically ran the speech research laboratory. We were small, but we were very good.
And did that include then certain projects that you're working on for the military, as you've mentioned a moment ago?
Yes.
Are there projects that you can discuss with the court today that are no longer classified?
The work that we did at Texas Instruments was classified.
And can you tell the court then about your experience in assisting in the formation of the speech recognition software for the F-16, for example?
That was a fun project. The Air Force TI wanted to provide advanced speech recognition support to the military's program. It was a AFTI F-16 flown out at Edwards Air Force Base. AFTI, AFTI, Advanced Fighter Technology Integration, I think. And that was a continuous speech recognition system that allowed the pilot to interact with his avionics while flying the F-16. And there were some very nice testimonials that some of the test pilots gave on that system. I have somewhere in my collection of videotapes some of those. I could bring some and show them if you'd like.
Within the context of the work that you did in order to perfect that system, can you advise the court what were some of the variables or some of the concerns that existed in attempting to create a reliable voice recognition program?
Oh, are you talking about speaker recognition now?
Sorry, speaker recognition, yes.
That really was not a speaker recognition effort. That was speech recognition. And so maybe it's not relevant to this particular case.
And then speak about then the difficulties with speech recognition that were apparent in the work that you were doing then.
Yes, the variability of speech is the ultimate challenge. And so, of course, these systems always are error-prone. There's no system that never, ever makes errors. And our job as speech technologists is to create technologies that are robust. In fact, the term robust is a very common term in speech research symposia.
Then let's move forward. And how long were you with Texas Instruments?
I graduated from TI after 20 years because I was more interested in pursuing the technology than in pursuing the products. And so I graduated and went to SRI International in Menlo Park, California.
And what is that? And tell me that company, what is that company?
SRI International. SRI stems from Stanford Research Institute.
And what?
It's not associated with SRI, with Stanford anymore, but it is in Menlo Park, California.
And what was your work with that company?
I joined their research team as a senior scientist, and on my second day of work, I was contacted to be borrowed to the federal government to work for DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Agency. So I really have very little work experience at SRI International.
When you began working then with DARPA, what was the focus of your work with DARPA?
Well, I was a program manager there at DARPA, and my responsibilities were expanded at that point to all of human language technology, directing programs for DARPA to advance the state of the art in human language technology. I carried with me my obsession with evaluation and imposed upon all those programs what everyone calls now evaluation-driven research.
And if you would, just to sort of in layman's terms, explain for the court then what you were doing for DARPA, the type of projects you were working on, and the type of research you did in order to accomplish those projects.
Evaluation-driven research involves, in particular, especially for speech technology, for language technology in general, involves establishing research goals in terms of technical objectives, collecting a corpus of data with which to create the technology and separately with which to evaluate the technology, giving to selected research teams the task and the data, letting them do their thing, then bringing them back to a formal evaluation using unseen test data, and then coming together at a conference to discuss results and plan the next step.
And how long were you with SRI or the assignment to DARPA?
Well, I was first assigned to DARPA. That lasted a little over 2 years. Then I was assigned to NSA. That lasted longer. And then I was assigned to NIST. And in total, I spent about 10 or 11 or 12 years in D.C.
If I might, this time, Your Honor, we had marked his small CV for identification purposes. I don't know if you have it in front of you yet, but I would admit that or ask that you.
We have
Has it already been admitted?
the clerks.
Okay, I offered it in the state. We just hadn't officially.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, it'll come in as Defendant's Exhibit 3.
Thank you. Dr. Doddington, is what you focused on then through DARPA NSA, in effect, the calibration or focusing on the accuracy of technologies dealing with speech recognition?
Yes, and that all comes from, as I said, speech is different. Speech is a performance.
And if you would then give some insight to the court, any particular projects that you worked on or that you supervised regarding the calibration of those technologies? If I ask the question properly.
Essentially, all of my work has been on that exact issue the last 20 years.
My understanding from looking at your CV, for example, is that you had done some work in the traditional, or viewing the traditional receiver operating characteristics performance, and it actually created or come up with a way to assist in that analysis. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure I know what you're getting at.
Okay. I'm just reading one note off of your CV that talks about the work that you had done on receiver operating characteristics using the Gaussian deviate scale.
Oh, yes. The traditional way of displaying data using an ROC curve is
Could you just, I'm sorry, could you explain
receiver
what
operating
an ROC
characteristic.
curve is?
Yes. Pardon?
What an ROC curve is?
Receiver operating characteristic curve. That traditional way of displaying the data is not very effective in providing some intuitive insight into what's going on. So I suggested, this had been done before. This is nothing new, but I just suggested displaying the ROC curve using Gaussian deviates rather than linear probability.
What is the Gaussian deviate scale?
Well, there is we can talk about the probability distribution of a number. And there are different probability distribution functions. But the most common one, and mathematically perhaps one of the simplest ones, is called a Gaussian distribution or a normal distribution, which is x squared over 2.
Okay.
I didn't want to say that.
That's okay. Let me ask it this way. You were present for other experts testifying in this regard over the past day? Were you here present
Yes,
to hear other experts testify?
Yes.
Mr. Owen suggested it to be that the Gaussian deviate is an algorithm. Is that an accurate review of the Gaussian deviate scale as you are aware of it?
These things tend to get corrupted between the technical perspective and the lay perspective, and so the concepts get munged. I'm not sure. I mean, I can say many things, but say something wrong and I'll correct it. Okay.
I'm going to try not to, but that'll happen a few times as we go through this, I'm sure. Let's move on to some of the work then that you had done with the NSA, to the extent that it can be discussed. What workload had you taken on behalf of that organization?
Well, I worked fully at NSA for a number of years, I think maybe 5 years. And let me just say, I worked in a technical advisory role in the area of human language technology. And I'd like to not be asked any more questions about that.
Certainly. Was the entirety of your focus, both with DARPA and with NSA, still in the area, as you now mention, of this speech and or speaker recognition industry or area of study?
At DARPA, it was, I think, much broader than that, all of human language technology, and I don't think I did anything on speaker recognition per se at DARPA. if I remember correctly. At NSA, that changed substantially. It worked almost entirely on speech technology and much work on speaker recognition.
And did the work for that agency then include or continue your focus on the calibration
Yes.
of technologies?
Yes.
So you would actually be, if I might, be given a task to review a certain technology that might exist to see whether or not it is a valid technology?
Repeat the question?
Sure. Did your work for DARPA, NSA, and your ongoing work since leaving TI, did it include then a review of certain technologies presented to see whether or not they were accurate or valid?
I wasn't focused so much on reviewing technology as in steering research. Now, of course, if you're going to steer research, you have to be knowledgeable about what has been done. But that wasn't really the focus of my effort.
And if you would, what was the focus of your effort with those different technologies and how you would focus the research regarding those?
In general, I think that if you're going to define a research program and hope that it advances the technology, you want to try to solve the most important problems that stand in the way of being able to field technology to solve applications. So what you try to do is to identify what are the key stumbling blocks and then to structure programs to solve them.
Then let's define some terms as we go forward to see where your area of expertise fits, okay? Define then for the court what you perceive to be speaker recognition, that area of inquiry.
Speaker recognition is the ability to recognize who's talking.
And there are certain systems that attempt to do so that you're aware of?
Yes.
Okay. Some of which you've talked about that you've had some experience with even as early as your TI days, correct?
My memory becomes very vague. I am not sure. I don't believe there were any commercial speaker recognition products when I was working on speaker recognition at Texas Instruments.
Let's talk then about speech recognition. Define that for us, if you would.
Speech recognition is the process of recognizing the words that people are saying.
Are those two different areas of study?
Yes, one is you're recognizing what is said, the other is you recognize who is saying it.
And are there different requirements or criteria in order to be able to accomplish success in those two industries or areas of study?
Well, the processes are quite different, but the general mathematical techniques are the same. In essence, you're trying to create probability models for the speech in terms of the words or the speech in terms of the speaker.
You had then mentioned that you'd done some work for or through NIST. Is that correct?
Yes.
And would you define that organization?
National Institute for Standards and Technology.
And what does that do?
Well, it used to be called the National Bureau of Standards, and I think that characterizes what they do. They're trying to create standards for measurement. In terms of what I do, what I did there, in terms of what they do in general in the speech technology area is they have kind of adopted the evaluation-driven paradigm, not and in terms of fostering research, in a general sense, in the area that we're interested in here, the speaker recognition area, they have a whole series of periodic, semi-periodic evaluations. They used to. This started a long time ago, and for the past 10 or 15 years, they've tried to have an evaluation once a year. There's a lot of effort spent on creating these evaluations because, again, it's all empirical. You supply data, you define the task, and you invite people to participate in performing the task on the data that's supplied so that you can see how well the technology works. This, by the way, is a very wonderful government idea to get people to do research to advance the state of the technology for free. It's not quite for free because there's a lot of money spent in setting up the evaluation, but in the speaker recognition area, since it has become quite popular, no money, or typically no money, is given to the researchers. They get their money some other way, and so you get a lot of research bang for the buck. The last evaluation done in 2012 with a workshop right here in Orlando last December, there were 58 research participants from 6 of the 7 continents in the world. There was no participant from the Antarctic.
How is NIST funded then?
Well, I don't know everything about how NIST is funded. I know a lot of money comes from the National Security Agency.
As a then sort of client of NIST, the NSA has interest in moving forward or progressing these different industries?
Right. The NSA depends upon, they're very keen on improving their own technologies, and by giving money to NIST, they get to call the shots about what the tasks are that are being evaluated.
And in effect, what evaluations will be performed, correct, on what type of technology?
Exactly. So, for example, you might expect, NIST does a lot of evaluation on telephone speech.
NSA has an interest in telephone speech, I
You
would
might think
imagine.
so.
Give us then just a typical, if not the last one, we'll come back to the one you talked about in 2012 in a minute, but just to get a feel for what it is that NIST does, give us a example or a sample of an evaluation in a particular technological industry that NIST would undertake.
Well, let's just talk about speaker recognition.
Certainly.
NIST, and again, this is evolutionary. It happens over and over again. At least it has. A task is defined. Typically, it's called speaker detection, where you have a body of speech data that people are given that represents a particular individual. That's called the training data. This data is collected for as large a number of people as can be afforded, typically hundreds. And then so then the evaluation itself, NIST defines the tasks. It commissions collection of the data, typically from an organization at the University of Pennsylvania called Linguistic Data Consortium.
Sorry, that then is just simply a base from which to get the information necessary to undertake the study?
Yes, the Linguistic Data Consortium, the LDC, collects the data. It's a big deal.
And is that in order to make sure that you have an appropriate, I'm going to call it a filtering process, or a way to make sure? Move forward on a fairly foundational issue, Your Honor. Thank you. Is that then, are they there to sort of make certain that the sampling is appropriate?
Well, that responsibility is distributed, but LDC is where the buck stops.
So you're saying LDC then gets the information, then what happens?
Is distributed under the supervision of NIST to the participants. They then perform the test, and then the results are sent to NIST. NIST does the scoring, the evaluation, sends the results back to the participants, and then sets up a workshop where everyone comes together to share their results and decide where and talk about what the issues are, what the problems are, what should be done next, what do we need to solve the remaining problems. There are always remaining problems. And of course, there are always remaining challenges, so that the next evaluation may actually raise the bar.
And what was your role then with NIST during these evaluations? Or just your role with NIST generally?
Well, I tell them what I think.
Are you a participant in the evaluations, or do you help prepare the evaluations, or do you help come up with the goal of the individual sampling?
I help wherever I can. I keep involved. I like to think that my primary help is in defining the task and in defining exactly how you measure performance.
So in a layman's term, then, you help create the test that is then put out to the industry to be used?
Yes, I like to think that I wave the baton, but
as the conductor?
Yes, of course, I'm only a hired gun. They do what they will.
And how long have you been doing that with NIST?
Well, I've been an independent contractor since 2001.
Is that in the past 12 years or so?
I guess so, yes.
You've heard some of the expert testimony talking about the modalities that are used in this area of inquiry. Were you here for that?
Yes.
Can you go over what you identify as the different modalities for this area of inquiry?
Well, as you know, I'm interested in evaluation. People will do what they will. As my dad used to say, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. So I'd like to focus on the evaluation. How well does the system perform?
And specific to the differing modalities, have you had experience with the different modalities that are used, for example, for speech recognition?
Not personal experience, but from knowledge of the technologies, from reading other studies, and in general, well, in fact, I wrote an invited tutorial review of speaker recognition technology. Actually, I had forgotten all about this, but Mr. Mantai reminded me of it, so I went and looked it up, and this was in 1985, I believe. And at that time, from my review, it was pretty clear that, at least for well, let me step back. It's pretty clear that when different modalities were used for speaker recognition, that the best performance was simply by lay human listeners. And was from spectrographic examination. And third best, if you want to call it best, out of three, was from computer analysis.
And that was back in 1985.
Well, that's 1985. This is 2013. So what has happened in the interim? Well, human listeners, I don't know this for a fact, but human listeners, I think, are pretty much the same now as they were then. I also believe that spectrographic analysis is fairly static. There's no means of making progress on the spectrographic analysis. What has changed is that in the computer area, computers now are thousands of times, tens of thousands of times more powerful than they were, and they can now support the mathematical and probabilistic models that they could not back then. So I think, and the evidence there's evidence in the NIST evaluations that computer performance has come way up.
Let's then talk for a moment about the spectrographic analysis that you mentioned a moment ago. If you would, first, describe it or define it as you would define it.
Spectrographic analysis, and this I think relates to the forensic case, is looking at a spectrographic display of speech to identify salient characteristics that can be used to identify speakers.
Let's first simply define what is a spectrograph or a spectrogram. How do you get one?
Spectrogram is a time-frequency plot of energy in the speech signal. Typically, the energy is localized in frequency and time with a sliding window and coupled with a Fourier transform of the signal. And so this provides a plot of the energy in the speech as a function of frequency and time.
Okay. Now, as it relates to being able to recognize speech within it or speaker within it, how does spectrographic analysis accomplish that, or does it?
Spectrographic analysis involves a human that looks at the spectrogram. So I'm not sure I know.
What analysis is then done on the spectrograph in order to come up with an anticipated result?
Well, I'm not an expert in this area. I don't do this kind of thing. But I think traditionally, if you go back to 1962, a fellow from Bell Laboratories, Larry Kirsta.
Judge, if I may, the witness has said he is not an expert in this area and doesn't do it, so I would object to further testimony.
Let me focus him then on the evaluations that he is aware of.
Objection is sustained.
Rather than focusing on the individual spectrographic analysis. With your work with NIST and your experience, have you dealt with calibrating the industry, if you will, of spectrographic analysis?
I don't know of any evaluations that have been done recently on spectrogram reading, if I can refer to it like that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
I don't know of any evaluation work done on that recently.
And moving then to other modalities of analysis. You've heard testimony concerning biometric analysis, have you not?
Voice?
Yes, and just generic biometric analysis.
Well, that's a biometric analysis is an umbrella term that means everything and nothing.
If you would, then give a working definition to the court how you define biometric analysis.
You impose a biometric analysis would be imposing some algorithm on a biometric signal to produce an informative score.
And when an analysis like that is done, how do you get from that analysis to a result?
Well, the score is the result.
If you would, then explain the scoring that you're aware of is placed upon a biometric analysis.
Oh, well, there's two kinds of scoring. One is the score that is produced by the biometric system. The other is the score that I'm interested in, which is the evaluation of the output of the biometric system, the evaluation of that score.
Let's then talk about the one that you have knowledge of or background in, which is the evaluation of that system.
Right.
Tell me of your awareness then of evaluations of the biometric systems.
I am in the area of speaker recognition. That's what we do. That's what NIST does.
Okay, and then let's talk about that. What experience do you have on behalf of NIST and your general experience through your training regarding those analyses?
Well, they're done periodically. Currently, they're done every other year. The last one was, there was a workshop in December of 2012 here in Orlando. What can I say?
What was the basis of that evaluation? What was the foundation of that evaluation?
The data were several kinds of data. Speech data collected in an interview environment, speech data collected from a telephone conversation. There were various conditions in terms of additive noise, environmental noise,
what was the purpose of the underlying evaluative study?
Well, the purpose of the studies is to determine how well systems are doing, which systems are doing better than other systems, and that's not to find out who has the best system, but rather who has the best technology. It's interesting to see the scramble when someone comes up with a new algorithm, like the latest rage is something called I-vectors. Guess what? I-vectors do well. Next year, everyone has I-vectors. So it helps to direct, these workshops help to direct the research in productive ways. That's why we hold them.
And the evaluation that was done in 2012, did that include biometric systems?
All the systems are biometric. I mean, in the general definition, I don't see, this is what I mean when I say biometric analysis means everything and means nothing. I don't know. All the systems are biometric by the definition I offered.
Okay. Well, I just want to focus it for the court's consideration. If you would, what systems then were evaluated in the last 2012 evaluation program?
Well, there were
what types of systems or what systems individually?
There were 58 sites, and I believe there were 44 systems because a number of sites collaborated. What's the question?
Sure. what type of systems, and if you can give us a range of the type of systems that were utilized. I'll give you an example. You mentioned a moment ago the Easy Voice system. Was that system or a similar system part of the evaluative process?
I have to admit, I don't keep up on all the politics or all the companies or the products, but talking to my colleagues, and also listening to Mr. Owen, and he actually showed some results from the study. So he identified the progenitor system from which Easy Voice comes that was used in that evaluation.
Okay, let's speak to that for a moment then. Did you have an opportunity to review what Mr. Owen had sent over yesterday as far as a suggested analysis from NIST?
I saw that.
Okay. Can you explain to the court, or can you interpret for the court what that was?
I'm sorry, I really don't know exactly what you want me
Sure.
to say.
Well, let me rephrase it.
That system, he showed he showed performance ranking for the various systems as for a particular condition.
Okay, let's talk about that for a moment then. First of all, let me ask it this way. Was that sheet of paper a comprehensive NIST evaluation of his program?
Well, it showed performance under one of many conditions. Of course, it was picked because for that particular condition, the progenitor system for Easy Voice did relatively well. I think it ranked, according to what he showed, it ranked 4th out of 44 systems, which is quite good.
And by the progenitor system, you're talking about the software. That was the one that he testified concerning was a previous software program?
It was identified as SVID. The particular relationship between that system and the Easy Voice system, we can only ask Owen about that. I don't know how they relate, but apparently the SVID system was related in some way to the Easy Voice system.
And you had mentioned a moment ago that that occurred over or under certain conditions, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what those conditions were?
It was interview speech with added noise.
And where does that fit in sort of the spectrum of the type of conditions a NIST study might impose to identify the legitimacy or the effectiveness of a particular system?
Well, there were a number of different conditions, some coarsely grained, some finely grained. Another one of the dominant conditions was for telephone speech, and I just checked yesterday evening to see where the SVID system, how it fared on telephone speech, and it still was not bad. It was, I think, about 16th out of it. When you rank the systems in terms of the performance, I think it was 16th out of 44.
Let's talk about that for a moment, if we might. The sheet of paper shown by Mr. Owen, I think you said, showed the success rate, number 4 out of a number, on a very particularized set of circumstances, correct?
Right.
And it degraded, or did it degrade when an additional factor was placed on it, such as telephone speech as opposed to in-person speech? I'm
sorry, I don't recall.
Okay. you had said that the system had gone from number 4, I thought, to a number 16 ranking.
Yes.
Was that a degrading in that system's ability to properly identify speech based upon the added variable of telephone?
It was a relative degradation relative to the other systems. Yeah, I don't know relative to interview versus telephone.
Gotcha.
I don't know.
Other systems outside the SVID systems, they did better on telephone listening.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Speaking then more particularly about some of the variables that bring us here today, you've had an opportunity to review Mr. Owen's report, have you not?
Yes.
And actually the other reports that were generated as well in this case by Mr. Reich or Dr. Reich as well, correct? Yes. Okay. Primarily to Mr. Owen for or his system presently. And again, based upon your work for NIST and some of the experience or experiments that you helped create, are there any other variables that exist in this fact scenario that we have in this case that cause you concern about the accuracy or reliability of Mr. Owen's system?
Well, you heard what Dr. French said.
Well, I would like to know if you agree or disagree with Mr. French, but actually more importantly, I'd rather you give the court your opinion concerning the question I just asked, which is the approach of Mr. Owen's usage of that technology on the facts of this case.
Well, so I reviewed this. Mr. Owen said he could do speaker recognition with just 1 second of speech, and then he revised that. I think he said he could do it on 1/8 of a second. Well, doing speaker recognition to any level of reliability whatsoever on 1 second of good speech is absurd. I looked yesterday evening at on an earlier evaluation performed at NIST. I went back to 2008, which was the last time we did a systematic study of the effect of time on performance. And in that study, when you reduce, this is all very specific to particulars of the data, so you have to understand this just relates to a particular set of data. You change the set of data, things will change, but the trends are indicative. The data were all good data. The data were all collected over the telephone. And in 2008, I looked and I saw that when you reduce the amount of speech from 1.5 minutes to 10 seconds, this is for nominal modal speech, normal person talking normally over the telephone. The results basically were that the error rate went from 5% for 1.5 minutes of speech to 15% for 10 seconds of speech.
Standing on that variable for a moment and applying it to the facts of what Mr. Owen did, how significant is the variable of what you say normal modal speech, or just speaking as you and I might be speaking now? Is that what you mean when you talk about normal level
Yes.
speech? Okay. Now, that study, again, was done over the telephone, correct?
Yes.
Is that variable in and of itself, the fact that it's done over a telephone, one of the conditions that, one, have to be considered, and two, might affect the accuracy?
Yes. If you,
Why?
for example, if one speech segment is taken from a open room microphone and another speech token is taken from the telephone, then the performance degrades significantly, substantially. Why is it? Because the acoustical conditions are different.
Okay. How does that have to be addressed or accounted for then in a system that is evaluating the speech?
It must be addressed. How? I'm sorry, what's the question?
I guess how do you then address it, or how do you allow for it, or can it be?
Well, that's a research challenge.
Okay.
I just do the evaluation.
Mm-hmm. So that's one variable. The vehicle across which the sound is traveling, is that one?
You mean the sound pressure air path? Is that what you're talking about? Yes.
Telephone versus regular speech.
Oh, well, the issue with telephone is that, well, there are a number of issues with telephone that span, I think Dr. French talked about this a little bit, but they span from how you hold the microphone, what the microphone is, how you hold it next to your mouth. The channel isn't much of an issue anymore because it's all digital, so what you send in is what you get out.
In addition to the vehicle, then, you had mentioned that the length of the speech is significant as far as the available speech.
Well, I just gave you statistics on that.
Okay. Do you have any statistics then that would suggest the degrading of the accuracy potential from 5% to 15%, from 1.5 minutes to 10 seconds, if it degrades even further than 10 seconds?
I think using 1 second is ridiculous.
How about using 2.54 seconds? That was the amount of speech that you heard Dr. Nakasone say that he had been able to accomplish from his review of the 911 call.
So, okay, so you're talking about the channel. I have an anecdote about a conversation with Nakasone. May I share it? It tells you something about the importance
I
of
have to preface it with this: as long as it is relevant to your opinion, it's going to assist the court.
It speaks to the issue about channel variation. I was giving a keynote at a workshop in Toledo, France. Spain. Excuse me. Toledo's in Spain, right? The evening before the conference started, I was having dinner with Nakasone. We just happened to run into each other in the restaurant, and he was relating to me a very surprising case in which his biometric indicated that these two individuals were the same, but they couldn't be because they were speaking to each other over telephone channel. And we had a good laugh over that. But I said to him, it wasn't surprising to me because they were actually using the same channel. And that has a big impact on the results.
So the underlying channel that you're using, or the vehicle, as I called it, in and of itself could have some impact on the quality of the transmission?
Yes.
Okay. And we had just mentioned a moment ago about Dr. Nakasone's decision regarding the amount of speech that he was able to distill out, it being about 2.54 seconds. Were you here for that testimony? Did you hear it?
I had trouble hearing that, actually. I was remote, and I was actually in California, and Dr. Nakasone was not terribly understandable to me.
Based upon your experience, then, what would such a small amount of available speech do to the accuracy of the result of a testing of it?
Well, I already related that to you. It degrades it. The less you have, the worse the performance. And I suspect that in the evaluations that I'm familiar with, it's only gone down to 10 seconds. I suspect that the performance goes down precipitously beyond when you go below 10 seconds. Again, I will have to agree with Dr. French. If there are rare idiosyncrasies, or in the case of dismissal, if there are gross differences in the idiolect, for dismissal, maybe you only need a few seconds. If you get the right speech. But if you're talking about these computer algorithms that are not sensitive to dialect or things like this, then you need more speech.
Well, let's talk about then the standards that might need to be in place for the biometric analysis of speech. Do you have an understanding of any criteria or standards that should be applied in that regard? Do you know of any that have been created to give insight into those who are attempting to standardize their work in the industry of biometrics?
I am not familiar with that.
And additional variables that would affect the quality of the sampling. Again, you're familiar with the particulars of this case, correct?
Yes.
In this case, there was a certain type of speech, screaming or shouting speech. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And have you?
I'm sorry, it's all ridiculous.
And we'll get to that. When you have screaming or the type of speech that we have here, what does that do to the ability to properly assess it or evaluate it?
It destroys it.
And tell the court, if you would, why you're of that opinion.
I'll just go back to what I said originally about speech is a performance, and it's a function of, to a very limited degree, it's a function of the anatomy, the musculature of the speaker. The idea that you could, well, I'll just defer to Dr. French on this. He said it's quite eloquently.
What does a normal voice change, or how does it change when it becomes a scream?
Well, I have to admit, I'm just an electrical engineer. I have not studied speech in depth. I know quite a bit about speech by virtue of rubbing up against it over the years. I can read a spectrogram or two, but I can't answer your question.
Okay. In the area, then, that Dr. Reich focused his inquiry on, do you know of any standards that would be applied in his area of inquiry? Tell me why not?
Because I'm not a forensic speech practitioner.
Is there, in fact, an industry of speech or sound scientists that exist that deal with this subject matter? And if so, how would you define that community of experts?
Well, of course there are. Dr. French is a good example. There are others. I know a fellow in Australia, Jeff Morrison, who I think doesn't get along very well with Dr. French, because he's more the hard science guy that believes in the probability models and things like that. There's Phil Rose, who's also in Australia. So these people are respectable people in the forensic speech science community.
When you say forensic speech science community, is that its own separate community, or is that a community that is umbrellaed over by the more generic speech or sound scientists?
I don't think I can offer an opinion on that.
The area that you have spent your career studying, that community, define that for me.
Well, that's a completely separate community. Yeah.
And that's what I want to get to. So define that community for me.
In general, it's what I refer to as the hard sciences, the mathematical sciences, the probability and statistics and decision theory communities. People that are trying to quantify decisions. They're trying to characterize reliability as opposed to just simply making decisions.
And just so we're clear, what area of inquiry are you talking about when you say that that's the intent of that community?
To make decisions about anything, but here is we're talking about making decisions about whether a speaker is who he is thought to be.
Okay. When you say that that is a different community from the forensic community, tell me what you mean by that.
It really relates to the focus on between making decisions and knowing what confidence you have in your decisions. The forensic science practitioners are interested in making decisions. The community I run in is interested in calibrating the performance of decisions, making good decisions.
Are you concerned then with the way that the forensic community is addressing the same issues that you and your community address?
Let me try to address this by telling you that I have, for a long time, tried to induce the forensic science community to get calibrated. And I've done everything in my power to make that happen. And in fact, the last 2 NIST evaluations have included a special component that we would love to have the forensic science community participate in. It's we call it HAZAR. That stands for Human Aided Speaker Recognition. And one of the problems with the forensic science community is that they, well, first of all, in our regular evaluation, we have literally millions of decisions, millions of trials. So systems that are submitted must perform millions of evaluations. Why do we do this? In order to be able, well, number one, to get reliable estimates of performance. Number two, in order to perform the evaluation over as many conditions as we can reliably do. Because we want to know more about how performance varies under the various conditions. So that's why we have millions of trials. Forensic practitioners cannot do millions of trials. So in the 2010 NIST evaluation, we crafted a special human-aided speaker recognition part that involved 15 trials to try to induce the forensic community to participate.
And just so we're clear, by the forensic community that you're trying to bring into your fold, you're speaking about such members of communities such as Mr. Owen, Mr. Reich,
Yes.
And even
Yeah.
Dr. Holeen, who
Yes.
was at one point on the state's list?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, with that, this is what we're trying to do. This is what I was trying to do, and didn't happen.
Let me ask you, what was the result? When you say that you set up this procedure to try and bring in the forensic community, were you able to accomplish it?
No,
Why not?
that's speculation. You want me to speculate?
Let me ask it this way. Did you reach out to the forensic community?
Yes. Did.
And how would you accomplish that?
Actually, I have to tell you, I don't even know of Dr. Reich or Dr. Owen. I know of Haleen, but I don't know the other two. It was not possible for me to make a personal contact with these people to participate. But
That's what I was going to ask. So if you, on behalf of NIST, are preparing this study, and a component of it is a grouping of tests which would assist the forensic community in getting calibrated. Is that accurate so far?
yes,
Okay. Then how would you, or how would NIST, or how is the communication flow then to the forensic community accomplished?
through personal contact. Although I'll have to tell you, the NIST evaluation is huge. Everyone knows about it, even the forensic science community. So it's not a surprise.
You had mentioned that, were there any responses? Anybody in the forensic community who decided to submit themselves to a NIST evaluation?
Well, Dr. Nakasone didn't. And of course, the answer offered is, I'm too busy. There is one site that is involved in forensic that did actually participate, kind of. The Secret Service, Reva Schwartz at the Secret Service collaborated with MIT Lincoln Laboratory to produce a super system, and they actually did quite well in the hazard in the 2010 hazard evaluation.
Let's break that down, if I might, just a bit. Ms. Schwartz, what is her role with the Secret Service?
Well, I don't know. She's from my knowledge, she is their forensic speech scientist.
Okay. And who is Lincoln Labs?
MIT Lincoln Laboratory is a key contractor to NIST in providing them with speaker recognition technology.
Okay. They then collaborated back in 2010, and
Yes.
what was the result of that?
They actually did quite well on this hazard test. As I said, there were 15 trials. 6 of them were same speaker trials, where the answer is they're the same. 9 trials were different speaker trials. And the Lincoln system made 2 errors in each case.
Okay. And the
By the way, the speech data was not 5 seconds or 10 seconds.
I was going to ask
The speech data was one segment was taken from interview, and that was 3 minutes, of which probably at least 2.5 minutes were the speaker speaking. And the paired trial was taken from telephone, and that was 5 minutes. So you have about the same amount of speech from the speaker in both cases, probably about 2.5 minutes in the interview and 2.5 minutes of speech, nominal speech. One of the difficulties there was that the collection medium was different. One was an interview, the other was a telephone.
And that was one of the variables that was imposed on the study in order to see the variable differences?
Right. We wanted to make, if you're only going to have 15 trials, you have to have something to make the test difficult. Otherwise, everyone's going to get 0 errors and you learn nothing. Test difficult. And one of the ways the test was made difficult was to collect the data from different media. And you may ask then why we didn't reduce the amount of speech to perhaps 10 seconds. And perhaps that was a mistake. Maybe we should have done that. And maybe that was my fault. I should have.
Are you aware of any literature or papers that Ms. Schwartz or others involved in that study published or wrote about in regards to any concerns they had with that technology?
Concerns with the technology they used?
Any concerns with the issues of what they were dealing with?
Well, I know they wrote a paper on their results, and that's where I'm drawing these numbers from.
Did that paper have any suggestions or conclusions regarding the hazard, the human-assisted?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know.
Did any of those studies, aside from what you just mentioned, did anybody else in the forensic community submit themselves to evaluation through for the 2010 or any NIST evaluative process?
Well, I will tell you that for that evaluation, there were 20 submissions. So 20 sites, or combinations of sites, actually did the test, but I wouldn't call them forensic science practitioners. The only one that would fall into that category was what I just mentioned, the Reva Schwartz and Secret Service community, plus MIT Lincoln Laboratory. The MIT Lincoln Laboratory are not the forensic science community, but they helped by providing their biometric system.
Have there been any NIST studies accomplished to give any insight regarding facts at all similar to what we have here in the Zimmerman case?
I'm sorry,
And
ask the question again, what?
I'll break that down into some of the variables. Has NIST done any evaluations or any studies in an attempt to see the efficacy or the reliability of speaker recognition with screams?
No, that's a fool's mission.
Why is that?
Morning?
I was, but since you're the one testifying and the judge wants to hear it from you as well, I'd rather you give us your opinion.
There's no basis for making any kind of decision using the data in this case versus normal speech or even simulated screams.
Why not?
Because we have, well, from my perspective as an evaluator, I would say, okay, this sounds ridiculous. You think you can do it? Let's have an evaluation.
Were that the case, what would your concerns be with the parameters of such an evaluation?
I wouldn't have any concerns at all.
What do you think the variables that would need to be addressed would be?
It would be a challenge to create the corpus because you are trying to create data. Well, first of all, you'd never get this past the IRB.
What is that? I'm sorry.
What is that called? Basically, they have these institutions that protect the rights of the subjects. So in order to collect data under extreme stress, we have trouble collecting data under normal conditions, getting this stuff approved because of concerns about one thing and another with the subjects.
Are you then evidencing your concern in how you would get a like sampling of screams for the evaluative process?
How'd you get real scream data? You'd have to put someone under unethical amounts of stress.
Are you aware of any studies, even outside of the NIST studies, that would give any insight into the reliability of an evaluation by any of the modalities that we've talked about? Are you aware of any studies anywhere that would give any indication as to reliability of scream evaluations?
No, I don't.
I failed to go over just a couple of other variables that we had talked about earlier, particular to this case. We talked about the duration, correct?
Yes.
And so talked about the vehicle, that being over a cell phone, correct? Any concerns that you would have as an evaluator setting up an evaluation regarding other variables that you know exist in this case?
You know, I can share with you something that we did do under the radar, kind of, with the Linguistic Data Consortium. You see, I'm very interested in calibrating performance as a function of, I try to be a scientist. How well does the system perform under stress, under particular kinds of stress? So I've pushed to have noise added. I've pushed to have reverberation added. I've pushed to, and these are what we call extrinsic variables, variables that do not involve the subject. I've also pushed to have intrinsic variation added, which is much more difficult because the intrinsic variations have to do with the subject, with the speaker. One thing that we did with the LDC is to try to vary the vocal effort, which is 1% of the way towards screaming, I guess you might say. So maybe this is relevant. I mean, we tried to exercise what's known as the Lombard effect. The Lombard effect is an effect in which a speaker tends to speak louder when he's in a noise environment. So we simulated that, putting headphones on the speaker and turning his side tone down and turning the interlocutor's volume up, adding noise into the headset so that the speaker would automatically, without knowing it, speak louder. And we actually did an evaluation of that. And conversely, low vocal effort by turning the speaker's side tone up and not having noise in the headset, so that the speaker would automatically speak softer. And I don't have the numerical results with me, but I can tell you this had a significant effect on the performance of the speaker recognition system.
Were there another variable in the Zimmerman matter was the distance between the recording device, the cell phone, and the actors? Is that a variable that would cause you concern in your evaluative process?
Well, sure.
Why is that?
Because of increased noise level, reduced signal-to-noise ratio, because of reverberation. Yes, that has an effect. And in fact, that also has been measured in the NIST evaluations. And I don't have the numbers, but I can tell you that when you increase the distance from the microphone, the error rate goes up.
You were here for Mr. Owen's testimony, correct?
Yes, I was.
And you had heard that one of the things that he accomplished in order to make his machine work was to double the length of these samples. Were you here for that testimony?
Yes, unfortunately, I was.
First of all, do you have a concern with doing that, again, from an evaluative perspective as to what that might do to the underlying testing?
Pretty obvious.
If you were,
Doing that is ridiculous.
why is that?
You're not adding anything. If you take the same thing and repeat it over, why would that? On what basis can you say that that would improve the performance? It's a violation of common sense. Can I take this 1 second of speech data and play it over and over again for 10 seconds and think that I'm going to get the performance I would get if I had 10 seconds of speech data? No, it's called statistical dependence.
And what do you mean by that?
I shouldn't have said that, I suppose.
Now you have to define it, so.
One of the ways people improve performance is to take statistically independent samples that don't have a great deal of reliability, each one by itself, but when combined, the reliability becomes very good because they're statistically independent. So in technical terms, the variance of the result is reduced by the number of samples that you take.
Is that like when I say I'm pretty good at baseball and I'm pretty good at softball, so I'm great at sports?
Can't speak to that analogy.
No, don't speak to me personally. I'm just wondering if the analogy makes logical sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make logical sense to me. I don't know what you're talking about.
When you take speech and you take the pitch of speech and raise it up 3, 4, 5 multiples in order to make it similar to the comparison speech. Is that problematic in addressing a speech comparison?
I think you asked that, or Don asked that question of Dr. French also, and I was surprised at how mild he was in his response.
Perhaps you could be less mild.
That's ridiculous.
Why so?
Well, because the pitch frequency is a completely separate mechanism from, well, I guess French said it's not totally independent, but it's to first or second order of magnitude, it is completely separate and independent from the vocal tract frequencies, which are defined by the resonances in the mouth, not by how fast the vocal cords are flapping. So for example, if you basically scale up the frequencies, you are purposely distorting the formant frequencies, so they're not going to match at all. If they matched, well, there's no proper basis for comparing the formant frequencies when you distorted the frequency scale.
So if you were to do that in Mr. Owen's box or in any evaluative process, if you were to increase pitch or change a variable and then look for a match, what would you expect to get?
Not expect to get a match.
Which is, of course, what Mr. Owen's machine came up with, a non-match. were you here for Mr. Reich's testimony as well?
Yes, I was.
Have you had any opportunity to review or listen to the tapes and that are subject to this proceeding?
Yes, I listened to both the call to the dispatcher, non-emergency call, and to the 911 call.
Do you have any opportunity or ability to listen to it in a particular way, headphones or appropriate headphones or amplification process or anything like that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
Describe that if you would, and describe to the court what process you used to do your type of listening.
For which call?
For the first call, the non-emergency call?
Well, I use the same process. There's, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact name of the tool, but it's a free software tool that I got over the internet to that provides isolated. It provides the ability to listen to isolated portions of the signal. It shows waveforms. It optionally will show a spectrogram, and you can control the parameters of the spectrogram, which I did. And
That what's been identified as SoundForge, something like that?
no, I can't remember what it. I'm sorry.
Was that a similar program to the one that Dr. Reich suggested he used for his amplification process?
I have no way of knowing. Of course, I mean, a program displays a waveform, a program displays a spectrogram. They're all the same.
Okay. Using those processes, well, let me ask this first. Did you notice any glaring differences between the process that Dr. Reich said he utilized in listening to that non-emergency call? Any differences between that and the process that you used to do your listening?
Reich did.
Only what he testified to before the court, just that he amplified it and listened to it and cleaned it up a bit, whatever your memory of his testimony was.
Yeah, well, cleaning up the speech signal is a fairly loosely defined concept.
Let's talk about that for a minute. What does cleaning up any sound signal do to it?
Well, so there is this, one of the tasks in speech processing that has been addressed is to reduce the noise on a speech signal recording. And this is a very frustrating exercise because it's very, very difficult. Some limited success has been achieved in making the data more listenable, especially for spectrally discrete noises.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, if there's, for example, a 60-cycle hum or some whistle that's happening, or something that is, well, I say spectrally discrete. Basically, it's like a tone that is constant in the recording. And then you can suppress that and improve things. But even then, even for cases like that, it's very, very difficult to improve. It's virtually impossible to improve the intelligibility of the speech in the recording. The human ear is magical in terms of being able to pull out. As a matter of fact, that sometimes it pulls out too much speech that really isn't there. But even Reich himself, in his report, says that while he did do some enhancement and some noise suppression and made the speech more listenable, it actually either didn't help the intelligibility or degraded the intelligibility. And that comports with what's generally believed, understood in the industry, in the science, in the technology. That's the state of affairs.
Okay. And when you accomplished similar analysis by amplifying it, doing what you did to filter it, were you able to hear what Dr. Reich heard?
No.
In anywhere, we're talking now about the first call, the non-emergency call.
Right.
Do you know what Dr. French testified about? I think Dr. Nakasone did, this listener bias concept.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
What is that?
That's the ability of a listener to hear what he wants to hear, or what he's conditioned to, what he's preconditioned to hear.
And how significant effect is that on individuals' ability to perceive an event?
Well, apparently for Mr. Reich, it's very effective.
Similar questions, but more abbreviated, concerning your review of the 911 call. Did you have an opportunity to listen to that? Yes. Did you hear anything on there that Dr. Reich thinks that he heard? I'm sorry.
Are you talking about the stuff?
Not the yells or the screams.
Yeah.
Any additional?
Just the imaginary stuff, right?
Well, I will leave that up to the court to determine. Let's call it what Dr. Reich heard, and I'll ask you if you heard any of the additional language that he says he heard.
This is, God, this is absurd.
Is that a no?
That's a no. You know, I will have to say, one of the things that Mr. Reich put in his report is that it was critically important for this data to be 16-bit data. And it is actually 16-bit data in format.
How is it in practice or in effect?
But there's certain, when I did the amplification and looked at the spectrogram, it looked a bit odd to me. I was thinking, I saw this stuff on the waveform plot, and I thought, this doesn't look right. This doesn't look like 16 bits. So I hammer and tonged it and discovered that, in fact, the data in those recordings, both of those recordings, is actually 8-bit data. The top 8 bits of the recordings are all 0. And the only data in the recording is the lower 8 bits. It is, in effect, 8-bit data, 8-bit linear PCM. Amazing. How could we possibly have such a good recording? It sounds pretty good to me. And the only thing I can imagine is that the equipment at the recording point had a compounder in it that's pretty good, and for whatever reason, I don't know why they did this, they actually recorded it as 8 bits.
So it's not a 16-bit piece of sound?
It's a 16-bit format, but it's actually 8-bit data.
Is that similar, and I know this is going to go off base, is that similar to saying that I might have stereo headphones, but I'm only listening through one side?
That's a pretty bad analogy.
Well, thank God I don't do what you do. Does that, in effect, degrade the underlying reliability of the analysis if a requirement for 16 bits is a premise and it doesn't exist?
It doesn't help. I mean, it doesn't help. I don't think it's a big deal, to tell you the truth. It doesn't help. It degrades, at least in theory, and to a certain degree in practice.
Any insight on why he said that the 16-bit variable was so significant to his underlying ability to have an evaluation?
I think that's just talk.
Is there anything that you're aware of that Mr. Reich could have done or must have done in order to hear what you and others could not hear?
Judge, I'm going to object. That calls for nothing but speculation.
Do you know of anything in the literature, anything in your experience, anything in your training that would give us any insight as to how words might have been heard from any industry variable that you're aware of?
Nope.
If such was done, would you consider it a new and novel approach to this industry of speaker or speech recognition?
Yes, but it wasn't done. I guess one might call that speculation. I call it common sense.
The SVID program that Mr. Owen suggested had a good success rate. Did you actually look into the SVID evaluations and how they did under more complex circumstances?
Oh. Well, it turns out that this hazard, the SVID system in the 2012 evaluation, which is what Dr. Owen was showing his results for, right?
Yes.
It turns out that although this SVID system did not participate in the hazard evaluation, they actually did the hazard evaluation in terms of the non-human assisted biometric. How did they do that? Because these, in the 2012 evaluation, there were 20 trials. There were 20 trials out of the millions that everyone did. There were 20 trials, and these trials were actually included in the regular million trial evaluation. So they could be, wait a second, no, I take that back. They actually, I think the SVID system did participate. You know, I think under the auspices, I think it was called STC or something like that. They did participate in the hazard evaluation, and unfortunately, they did not do very well. You know,
STC that you mentioned, that system is actually the progenitor that we're talking about, the progenitor of the easy voice that Tom Owen uses.
I
correct?
am led to believe that. Yes, I don't know that, but but that's what I've heard. Yes.
Do you recall what their error rating actually turned out to be?
In the hazard?
I'm going to object. If he doesn't know it, he shouldn't testify about it.
So your objection is?
It is speculation. It is lack of foundation for the testimony.
I'll clear it up then, if I might, Your Honor. The STC system, is that in fact the progenitor of the easy voice? Let's
I
just
don't know
clear it
that.
up.
I don't know that.
Do you know that they were involved, the STC was involved in, I understand the objection, but I want to be clear, the STC was involved in the hazard evaluation?
Yes.
Judge, I'm going to object to the relevance then. If he
Just
can't
going to
connect
clear it
the
up
two.
with another.
First of all, one at a time. The court reporter can only take out one at a time. What is your objection?
There's relevance. If he can't connect the two, there's no relevance to pursuing the question.
And I'm not going to have him testify to the underlying result, but I do want to have him testify that that company was part of the evaluation because then the next witness can tie it together.
If he can't say that it was, or he has the knowledge of it, it's not relevant.
I want to just be clear. I'm only having him testify that the progenitor program, he hasn't testified to this, but the name is STC, that company involved itself in the evaluation. That's my question, my only question.
Sustained. Objection sustained.
And if I might have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes, you do.
Just a few more, Your Honor. We had talked briefly about your work with the NSA. Is that correct?
I worked for the NSA, yes.
Yes. And are you somewhat restricted in the information that you can present today to the extent that you can't discuss particulars of studies done on behalf of the NSA? Can you talk about not talking about it?
Well, you can ask questions. I can not answer them. I don't know.
Do you have a security level with the NSA?
Top secret clearance, yes.
Are there actually double secret top clearances above that, or is that it?
There are compartments within the top secret.
You are at such a level that the NSA trusts you with performing or creating and assisting in studies in areas of speech, speaker recognition.
I advise them on. I advise them in the area of speaker recognition.
Within that milieu of people, is there you and who advise NSA in the area of speech and speaker recognition?
Oh, yes, yes.
How many others hold a similar category of clearance as you do in the area of assisting the NSA with speech and speaker recognition?
I think virtually everyone at NSA has a top secret clearance. I don't know, but in terms of others who might have differing views from me, I try to suppress their influence. What are you looking for?
Just curious, are you one of the people that the NSA looks towards to assist them in such speaker and speech recognition studies as the ones you've involved yourself in?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Not for me, no, thank you.
Okay. Do you have any objection to breaking for lunch before you do your cross?
I'm amenable to whatever schedule the court wants.
Your cross would be, it's now 1:11.
I'm content either way, Your Honor. If
I'm asking you, how long do you anticipate your cross to be?
we will be here, I would bet between myself and Mr. O'Mara's follow-up, we'd probably take another hour.
Okay, we'll break for lunch until 1:45. Is that going to give you all enough time to grab a bite? Okay, Dr. Doddington, we're going to be in a recess and you're still under oath. So my instruction to you, sir, is that you're not to discuss your testimony either that you've already provided or will be providing with anybody, not even the lawyers. So you're not to have any discussions concerning what your testimony will be. Okay?
Okay.
With that, you're excused to go to lunch or to take a break until 1.